it does raise an interesting question. Why aren't service members allowed to carry their personal weapons on base? Here to discuss that issue and others is combat veteran and co-founder of the Mighty Oaks Warrior Foundation, Jeremy Stalnecker. So Jeremy, we usually talk to you about veterans issues. I mean, usually talks about the VA, anything like that. But I do want to start first with Iran and kind of work our way that way. Regarding Iran, last night was the debate. We heard a lot of the Democrat candidates kind of talking about what they think should be done in Iran. They kind of talked about how it puts troops in harm's way, that being the killing of Soleimani, whether or not an invasion is even on the table or anything like that. What is your take on their response to how veterans come up in this issue?
I think it's always interesting, and this is a great example of that with Soleimani. Anytime something happens, particularly in the Middle East, World War III is about to start. I mean, that's where we go automatically. Something happened, World War III is starting, and then the conversation transitions to, well, if World War III is starting, then there's going to be a draft. And now college-age young men and women are concerned. What does that mean for me? It's the craziest, most sideways conversation we could possibly have, but that's where it goes. And in the midst of all of that, you start to see news stories and news clips of service members, active duty service members, leaving their families, and the conversation around the impact that these deployments and this coming Armageddon is going to have on these service members' families. And if we step back and understand a few things about that picture, we realize really how ridiculous it is. In the last 20 years, since 9/11, we've had young men and women enlist to fight in our nation's military, understanding that they would probably be called on to fight bad guys someday, somewhere. This is not a peacetime military. They weren't enlisting in a world or a country where there hasn't been conflict. They know what they're signing up for. And yet we treat them often as though they're victims to be pitied because somehow in the enlistment process, people forgot to tell them they might have to go fight the bad guys. And really that couldn't be further from the truth. There are a lot of reasons that people come into the military. But at the end of it, these young men and women want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. They want to serve an ideal. They want to serve an ideology. They want to accomplish something that most Americans will never accomplish. And to make them the victims in this foreign policy discussion is absolutely absurd. The very best that America has are serving in the United States military, which is one of the fundamental reasons we have the military that we do, and that we can accomplish the things that we can. Even looking at the Soleimani thing, to understand that someone thousands of miles away was flying a drone that sent a missile that hit a very strategic target, not a city center, not a group of buildings, but the target they were going after is absolutely incredible. That speaks back to the amazing folks that we have serving our military. And to say that they're somehow the victims of this is absolutely absurd.
I think that's an interesting point, especially acknowledging the fact that some of these wars are almost now as old as the people who are joining the military.
Absolutely right.
I mean, to say that they're naive to that is a little bit condescending. I mean, they know what they're getting into, they know what they're doing, and to say otherwise, I mean, it's the typical conversation that we have with a lot of these people who think that they know better than the people who are actually in that situation themselves. But I think it's important, too. You talk about the dangers that are posed when people do go abroad, but we've also seen some of the hardships for our veterans here, or not even veterans, but active service members as well. I mean, we could refer back to that Pensacola Air Base situation. And service members aren't allowed to carry their personal firearms on bases. Can you tell us why that is, and really what, I mean, a general synopsis of what service members who aren't allowed to do that, what they think about that policy?
Right. It's, again, I think it's ridiculous, those are my words, to say that an individual who has been thoroughly vetted through a process that leads them into active duty service with the United States military, who has been trained in the safe use of firearms, who is called upon to use those firearms, again, in places around the world to defeat America's enemies, has the right to bear arms taken away from them when they're on a federal installation. The reason for that would be, I think, given as a safety reason. The base commander, whoever it is that's responsible for that facility, would say, well, we need to be able to control those weapons that are coming on and off of base. What's interesting with that, however, is, and you outlined this, you talked about the various places that these shootings have taken place. Not too long ago, there were a series of shootings, I believe, in Tennessee at recruiting offices. Why is that? Because it's a safe place to attack unarmed citizens, those who can't carry weapons, who aren't allowed to carry weapons. And really, it puts our servicemen and women in a dangerous position. They should be allowed with the proper training which they've received to carry firearms, concealed or otherwise, on military installations. And we would see most of these things, if not go away, dealt with clearly and immediately, and not pose the danger that they do today.
Right. I mean, it's hard to name a bigger community that is more responsible with firearms than perhaps the service members. But we want to kind of bring this back at home too. So we kind of talked about the Pensacola Air Base. We've talked about the Pulse nightclub shooting, Fort Hood, all of these things that these horrible events that came at the hands of radical Islamic terror right here at home. And now those are kind of isolated incidents. I mean, for the most part, we're not in a community that's just ravaged by terror all the time. But now we do hear Iran kind of making threats, saying that there are sleeper cells here in the U.S., saying that there's a bounty on President Trump's head, things like that. Are these types of stories that are overplayed by the media, or is there something to be said here about the idea of these type of sleeper cells, about Islamic terror here in the United States?
When we talk about sleeper cells and a lot of these things, I think we often believe that now that something has happened in Iran, that now those sleeper cells will be activated. I believe that there are people in the United States today who are here with the intent to hurt Americans. That's how terror works. I don't think it's something we're waiting for. I don't think there's a trigger point at somewhere else in the world that's going to cause this to happen. I think we are in a position where people are looking for targets of opportunity to do damage to Americans. And it's important that we've acknowledged that what happened in Pensacola was an act of terror. And that's the first step in acknowledging that we have something we need to worry about.
No, I mean, to ignore that is to ignore not only the lives of the people who lost that, but also the policies that could prevent that. I mean,
that's exactly right.
It's a reality that we live in. It's an unfortunate one, but it's one that we have to face. Jeremy Stalnecker, your input is always appreciated. You're welcome back anytime. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Alex.